From the moment Ava came into this world, blue-eyed and all smiles, it was clear to everyone, especially Mom and Dad, that she could do no wrong. Me? I was the other daughter, the one who got whatever was on sale, second-hand thoughts, second-hand clothes. You see, Ava needs the best, Mom would say as she sorted through piles of shiny new gifts for my sister and handed me something like a pair of socks or a book that looked like it had been read a dozen times already. It wasn't just about the gifts. It was everything. Ava got the new clothes, the new gadgets, and all the attention. Ava, bless her heart, grew up knowing just how much everyone adored her. And why wouldn't she? She was treated like royalty. That kind of thing changes a person. She learned early on how to get her way, and if that meant stepping over me, then so be it. She'd pull these stunts, you see, tricks that left me holding the bag. Like the time she broke Dad's favorite watch and slipped it into my drawer. Guess who got grounded for a month? And she was slick, too. Got all the relatives eating out of her hand. They saw her as this sweet little angel, while I was the troublemaker, the bad seed. Elise is just difficult, they'd whisper, shaking their heads as if I couldn't hear them. But I did. Every word. Elise, why can't you be more like your sister, was a frequent chorus from Mom. She never missed a beat, especially when comparing me to Ava, who fluttered around like she owned the place. I remember one particular afternoon, we were in the living room, the sun casting long shadows across the carpet. Ava was prancing around, showing off a new dress Mom had bought her, one of those fancy brands you see in store windows. I glanced down at my own clothes, faded from too many washes, and felt that familiar pinch of envy. Isn't she just adorable? Mom cooed, clapping her hands in delight. Dad was on the couch, his attention half on his newspaper, half on Ava. Elise, can you be a dear and fetch your sister's ballet shoes? She has her recital practice soon, and you know how important it is. Mom asked without taking her eyes off Ava. I nodded, heading to Ava's room, which was twice the size of mine and stuffed with toys and gadgets I could only dream of. As I rummaged through her mess to find the damn shoes, I couldn't help but think, why her? Why not me? Here, I said, tossing the shoes at Ava's feet more harshly than I intended when I got back. She looked up, her blue eyes wide, a perfect picture of innocence. Elise, don't be rough. Apologize to your sister, Dad's voice boomed from behind his newspaper. Sorry, Ava, I mumbled, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. The only one who ever got it, who ever really saw what was going on, was Grandma, Dad's mom. She was tough as nails and didn't let anyone feed her a line of crap. Tom, she'd say to my dad, her voice stern yet not unkind, you're blinding yourself if you think your girls are being treated the same. Elise deserves just as much love and attention as Ava. But Dad would just wave her off, and Mom would roll her eyes like Grandma was just being dramatic. We treat them equally, Mom would insist, but her words fell flat in the heavy air filled with all the things they'd given Ava and not me. Grandma would pull me aside after these talks, her hands gripping mine with a strength that belied her age. Listen, Elise, you've got to be strong. Don't let them dim your light. You're just as bright, just as deserving as your sister, she'd tell me, her eyes fierce and convinced. It was enough to get me through, most days. Graduation day was supposed to be a milestone, a day to celebrate years of hard work. But for me, it was more like the final nail in the coffin of any support I might have expected from my parents. They flat out refused to help with my college tuition. We just don't think it's a good investment, Dad said with a shrug, as if my future was a bad stock option. That's when Grandma stepped in. Her offer to pay for my education wasn't just about money, it was a lifeline, pulling me out of the toxic environment of our home. You're going to do great things, Elise, and I want to see you get that chance, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Leaving home for college felt like shedding an old skin. I studied law, a field I chose partly out of interest and partly because it felt like wielding a sort of power I'd never had growing up. College was my realm, a place where my past didn't define me. When I graduated, I didn't bother going back home. Instead, I rented an apartment in the city and started my new life as a lawyer. My younger sister, Ava, stayed with our parents, who were now completely under her spell. Grandma, who kept in touch regularly, often shared stories that painted a clear picture. Ava had them wrapped around her finger, her every wish their command. "It's like watching a queen with her court," Grandma said during one of our calls, her tone a mix of amusement and dismay. I didn't talk much to Mom and Dad. Our conversations were limited and strained, usually prompted by them and only when they wanted to remind me of Ava's birthday or some achievement of hers. "Don't forget your sister's turning 20 next week," Mom would say, her voice cheerful as if this reminder would bridge the gap between us. My own birthday would come and go unnoticed by them, an oversight that stung less with each passing year. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, the city sprawling peacefully below, I made a decision. It was time to truly let go. The grievances and grudges, the constant comparisons to Ava, I had to release them all. I couldn't erase the past, but I could decide how much power it held over my future. My life had settled into a comfortable routine, work, the occasional happy hour with colleagues, and quiet weekends spent indulging in my love for mystery novels. That was until the day Nathan walked into my office. Nathan was a new client, referred by a colleague who thought I'd be perfect for his case. It was some messy business dispute he'd gotten himself tangled in, nothing I hadn't handled before. But from the moment he walked in, I could tell Nathan wasn't just any client. He had this easy confidence about him, a charm that didn't feel forced. "So, you're the miracle worker I've been hearing about?" Nathan said as he settled into the chair across my desk, his smile disarming. I laughed, trying not to show how flustered I was. "I don't know about miracles, but I'll do my best to sort this out for you." The case turned out to be more complicated than I had anticipated, pulling us into a whirlwind of legal strategies and late-night strategy sessions. Nathan was more involved than most clients, always wanting to understand every detail, which meant our meetings were long and frequent. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Nathan stopped at the door as we were leaving the office. "Hey, Elise, have you eaten yet? I'm starved, and I owe you a meal for keeping you so late. There's a decent Italian place nearby. What do you say?" I hesitated, not used to mixing my professional life with anything personal. "Sure, why not? But just so we're clear, this is strictly a thank you dinner, right?" "Strictly professional," he agreed with a wink that suggested he was just as aware of the tension between us as I was. Dinner was a revelation. Away from the stacks of legal documents, Nathan was funny and insightful, sharing stories of his travels and his business adventures. I found myself opening up about my own life, more than I usually did with people I hadn't known for long. As we walked out of the restaurant, the cool evening air felt like a splash of clarity. "Thanks for dinner, Nathan. It was nice to get out of the office for a change," I said, meaning it more than I wanted to admit. "Glad you enjoyed it. And, Elise, I was thinking, once this whole mess is over, maybe we could go out again? No documents or disputes, just us?" I was taken aback by his directness, but something about the idea was incredibly appealing. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with my own willingness to dive into whatever this was turning into. The weeks that followed were a blur of courtroom battles and quiet dinners with Nathan. Winning the case felt doubly sweet, not just for the professional victory, but for what it might mean for us. As we celebrated over drinks, Nathan reached for my hand across the table. "Here's to winning cases, and, hopefully, winning over beautiful lawyers," he toasted, his eyes locked on mine. "Careful, counselor," I teased. "You might be charged with excessive charm." His laugh, warm and genuine, was the perfect end to our little celebration. It wasn't long after that when our professional relationship evolved into something more personal. It had been a year since Nathan and I first went out, and every moment felt right with him. So, when he proposed, it wasn't just the excitement of the moment that swept me away, it was knowing I'd be with someone who truly understood and valued me. I said yes without a second thought, and we decided not to waste any time. Excited and a bit nervous, I called my parents to share the news. I guess a part of me hoped that this might bring us closer, bridge the gap that had only widened over the years. Their reaction was lukewarm at best, but they invited me over to talk about the wedding plans. When I arrived at their house, I could sense the tension right off the bat. My mom and dad expressed their joy, but their words felt hollow. I could tell they still harbored the old belief that Ava should be the first to marry, not because of age, but because she was always the favored one. During the visit, Ava surprisingly turned on her charm. She smiled, acted sweet, and then dropped her offer like it was the helping hand of a saint. "Let me organize your wedding, Elise. It'll be my way of showing how much I want things to be good between us." I was taken aback. But before I could decline, my parents chimed in, pushing me to accept her help. "You know, Elise, Ava's trying here. It would mean a lot if you let her do this for you," my mom insisted, with that tone that meant this was not just a suggestion, but a directive. Feeling cornered, I reluctantly agreed. Ava got to work, or so she said. Every time we spoke, she assured me everything was under control. "You just focus on your job. I've got this," she'd say cheerfully on the phone. Her confidence was convincing enough that I didn't bother to check the details myself. But as the wedding day approached, a nagging feeling prompted me to look into the preparations myself. I called the venue, expecting to hear a rundown of the plans. Instead, I was met with, "Well, we have the room reserved for you, but that's about it." My heart sank as I made more calls, to the florist, the caterer, the decorator. The story was the same. Ava had made initial inquiries, and then nothing. No follow-ups, no bookings, no payments. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal, but I wasn't about to let her ruin my big day. I called her, needing to hear her lie to me one more time. "Hey, Ava, just wanted to check in. Everything on track?" "Oh, absolutely. It's going to be beautiful, Elise. Don't worry about a thing," she replied, her voice bubbling with feigned enthusiasm. I hung up and immediately called Lila, my friend who's a professional wedding planner. I explained the situation, how Ava had dropped the ball, thrown it away, and how I was 2 weeks out from a wedding that was nothing more than a booked room. Lila was aghast, but sprang into action. "Elise, I'm on it. Consider it done. We'll pull this off," she assured me with a determination that was both comforting and invigorating. The wedding day, despite the underlying tensions, unfolded beautifully. The decor was impeccable, the music set a joyful tone, and our guests seemed to revel in the celebration. It was everything I had hoped for, yet a part of me remained on edge, especially when I noticed Ava, lurking in the corner with a scowl, watching everything unfold with visible displeasure. Midway through the reception, my mother took to the microphone, her voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we must give a special thanks to Ava, without whom this beautiful event would not have been possible. Elise, you should be very grateful to your sister." The room filled with applause, directed at Ava, who wore a feigned smile of humility. I felt a surge of anger at the blatant lie, my hands clenched under the table. I couldn't let this go, not today. Standing up, I interrupted the applause with a firm voice. "Actually, I need to set the record straight." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Ava didn't organize any of this. In fact, she nearly sabotaged the whole wedding. You could hear a pin drop following my declaration. My parents' faces turned red with anger, and Ava's eyes widened in shock, her facade crumbling. "How dare you say that?" my mother exclaimed, her voice sharp and loud. "You're slandering your own sister on your wedding day." "I'm saying that 2 weeks before today, nothing was ready. No flowers, no cake, no decorations, nothing that you promised was done," I continued, the facts stark against the backdrop of the festive decorations. Ava, seizing the moment, began to cry loudly, her sobs theatrical. "See what I mean? She's always hated me. Always trying to make me look bad." The guests, caught off guard, murmured among themselves, many shaking their heads as they looked at me. It seemed their sympathy lay with Ava, who played the victim to perfection. "It's not slander if it's the truth," I retorted, feeling isolated as the room buzzed with whispers. The tension escalated quickly. Ava, still sobbing, ran out of the hall, adding drama to her performance. The atmosphere soured, turning what should have been a celebration into a spectacle of family drama. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was worse than I could have imagined. Ava disappeared, leaving behind a note that pointed the finger squarely at me. It claimed I had always mistreated her, that I was the reason for her misery. This note turned everyone against me, even those who had known us our whole lives. My parents believed every word, blaming me for her disappearance. Even my grandmother, the one person who had always seen through Ava's manipulations, turned cold. "I can't believe you would push her to this," she said one day, her words cutting deeper than any knife. She announced then that she was cutting ties with me, influenced perhaps by the mounting pressure and Ava's dramatic note. In the aftermath, I found myself increasingly isolated. Friends and relatives sided with Ava, leaving me to navigate the harsh reality of being ostracized by those I loved. Despite the joy that my marriage to Nathan should have brought, these events cast a long shadow over our new life together. The months following our wedding saw Nathan increasingly absent, his business trips stacking up like the unread books on my nightstand. Our conversations dwindled to polite updates, our moments together, once filled with laughter and shared secrets, now felt more like obligatory check-ins. One chilly evening, as I sorted through some bills and receipts, a particular slip of paper caught my eye. It was a credit card receipt for a high-end women's boutique, $2,000 worth of dresses and accessories. Confusion washed over me. My birthday had passed without any gifts, and our anniversary was months away. I didn't confront Nathan. Instead, I opted for a route that felt both invasive and necessary. I hired a private detective. The detective was a gruff man named Carl, who listened to my story with a noncommittal grunt. "I can look into it, but are you sure you want to know what I might find?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes. I have to know," I replied, my resolve firm. 2 weeks later, Carl's call came. "I have the results," he said simply, his voice neutral. It had been a while since I had spoken to my grandmother, especially after the debacle with Ava that left the family in shards. Grandma was now frail, her health waning rapidly, but her mind remained sharp, her understanding of family dynamics deep and nuanced. I visited her, the photos, the evidence of Nathan's betrayal, weighed heavily in my bag. She greeted me with a weaker smile than I remembered, the lines of pain etched deeply around her eyes. "Elise, it's been too long," she murmured, her voice a whisper of its former strength. "I know, Grandma, I'm sorry," I replied, taking a seat beside her frail form. The distance between our visits had grown, filled with unsaid words and unresolved tensions. I hesitated for a moment before pulling out the photos and sliding them across the table to her. She looked at each one, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she looked up at me, her eyes wet with a mixture of sadness and compassion. "Oh, Elise," she sighed, reaching out a trembling hand to mine. "Your sister fooled us all, didn't she? Even me." Her words were a balm and a sting. "Yes, she did. And I think Nathan has too." Grandma pulled me into a frail hug, her body fragile, but her embrace firm. "I'm so sorry, my dear. I should have listened, should have seen." The conversation that followed was a mix of tears and laughter, a recounting of old wounds and the tentative touching of new ones. A month later, Grandma passed away. The reading of Grandma's will was scheduled at our family lawyer's office, a day I approached with a heavy heart. As relatives gathered, the room buzzed with the usual prelude to significant family events, some catching up in hushed tones, others exchanging forced pleasantries. I took a seat at the opposite end of the room, my heart pounding not just from the impending revelations of the will, but also the palpable hostility in the air. My husband, Nathan, sat beside me, his presence more obligatory than supportive. Then, the door opened, and to everyone's shock, Ava walked in. She looked different, harder, more calculated, and her smirk as she entered said she was aware of the effect her sudden appearance had on all of us. My parents, teary-eyed from surprise and immediate joy, rushed to her. "Oh, Ava, you're back," my mother exclaimed, engulfing her in a tight embrace. "Dad, Mom," Ava greeted, her voice smooth as she returned their hugs, but her eyes scanning the room, landing on Nathan and me with a gleam of triumph. Without hesitation, she approached him, leaned in, and kissed him possessively. Nathan, betraying no surprise, reciprocated with equal fervor. The room fell silent, stunned. Pulling back, Ava turned to face the room, her smile now a smirk. "I planned my disappearance," she confessed loudly, enjoying the shock her words caused. "It was all to ensure Grandma would leave everything to me, thinking Elise had driven me away." The revelation sent a murmur of disbelief around the room. My parents looked from Ava to me, confusion etching their faces. The lawyer, Mr. Hartley, cleared his throat, bringing attention back to the matter at hand. "If we may continue," he said, before reading out the will. To everyone's shock, especially Ava and Nathan's, Grandma had left everything to me. Ava's face turned from smug to stunned. "This can't be right," she stammered. "Check it again." Mr. Hartley adjusted his glasses, his tone professional. "The will is quite clear. Your grandmother made her final amendments very recently." I stood, my voice steady as I addressed the room. "I've known about their affair for months. Ava hasn't been in hiding from us, she's been living in the city where Nathan often travels for business." I pulled out the photos and evidence from the detective. I laid them on the table for everyone to see. "Not only did you try to manipulate Grandma, but you also betrayed me, Nathan," I said, my voice devoid of the pain that once would have cracked it. Nathan stood, his expression one of someone cornered. "Elise, let's discuss this." "There's nothing to discuss," I cut him off sharply. "I'm filing for divorce and for compensation for the betrayal." Ava tried to interject. "Elise, we're family. Surely we can." "Family?" I interrupted, my voice bitter. "You lost the right to call yourself that when you decided to deceive and manipulate us all for your own gain." My parents, finally grasping the full extent of the deceit, looked between us, their faces pale and drawn. "I suggest you find a good lawyer," I told Ava, not bothering to hide the scorn in my voice. Turning to Nathan, I added, "And you'll need one too." As I walked out of the lawyer's office, the weight of the past months felt lighter. The road ahead would be tough, no doubt, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the reins of my life firmly in my hands. After everything that went down, I took the only steps I saw fit as a lawyer and a woman scorned. I filed for divorce from Nathan and sued both him and Ava for the emotional havoc they wreaked with their deceit. The court proceedings were straightforward, thanks to the undeniable evidence gathered by the detective. The judge awarded me a substantial sum for moral damages, a small solace for the betrayal I endured. When the final gavel fell, closing the chapter on my marriage and the lawsuit, I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. Since the divorce and the lawsuit, I've cut ties with Nathan and Ava. Even my parents chose Ava's side again, trying to paint her as the victim, misunderstanding her actions as mere mistakes rather than the manipulations they were. This betrayal from them was almost as painful as the original deceit, making it clear that our paths had irreversibly diverged. Friends and other relatives have been supportive, their actions showing they understood the true colors of Ava and the depth of her deception. It's comforting, in a way, to know that not everyone was fooled by her charade. One evening, as I was arranging some of Grandma's old books on a shelf in the living room, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Uncle Mike, one of the few relatives who staunchly stood by me through everything. "Elise, just wanted to check in on you," he said, his gaze taking in the changes I'd made to the house. "Thanks, Uncle Mike. Come in." I invited him into the living room. He looked around, nodding approvingly. "You've done well with the place. It feels like your grandmother would have wanted, full of life again." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. It's been therapeutic, honestly. Living here, maintaining her home, it's helped me find a bit of peace after everything. Uncle Mike patted my shoulder, a comforting gesture. "She'd be proud of you, Elise. Not just for this house, but for standing up for yourself. It's what she always wanted for you." As Uncle Mike left later that evening, I stood at the doorway, watching the sun set. The horizon was ablaze with colors, a vivid reminder that life could still offer beauty after the storm. With the house as my anchor, I felt ready to face whatever came next, carrying forward the legacy of strength and resilience that Grandma left me.